Now that we have a basic theme and a basic story in mind, we can start diving into the nitty-gritty and really begin expanding on what the outline of our song or our poem is going to look like. Let's get started. Welcome to the 5th episode of the WhyItMeters series and the second installment in the 3-part series, really diving into the process of creating a poem by pulling back the curtain and actually showing you how I create a poem in real time. My name's Lucas and I'm your residential poetry guide. Now for this episode, we are going to really dive into the structure of the poem. And really, we're not doing a poem this time, as I've said. We're doing a song. And the song makes it a little bit difficult because oftentimes there is no real set structure, at least in terms of meter. Because what you'll find is that there's different ways of speeding up your pronunciation of a word or a lyric, and there's ways of slowing down your pronunciation of a word or a lyric. And in this way, you're able to affect and distort the tempo or the rhythm of the song. And you see this all the time, especially in rap songs and whatnot. You'll have people who slur their words and are able to rhyme things that really shouldn't be able to be rhymed because they're kind of distorting it. But we get enough of the essence of what that word is that we understand it. And so there's a little bit of liberty with creating songs and songwriting, but at the same time it's a little bit more difficult because in a similar way to free verse, there's no real set formula. That being said though, in terms of the overarching structure, there's a little bit of song technique, a little bit of song structure to be had here. And so first I'm going to introduce the idea of different sections of a song. Now, all of us know this innately. I mean, just by listening to a song on the radio, you'll pick up where the song repeats, where it has something new, and where it kind of distorts or subverts our expectations. And so simply, what I'm going to write here is a very simple structure that I've decided to choose for this song because, one, it's instantly recognizable. 2, it's not just a nursery rhyme sort of song. It actually has some semblance of legitimacy and probably will sound more legitimate and more pleasant to the ear. And 3, it's a little bit of a challenge, because it has a couple of different verses, a couple of different repetitions of the chorus, and a bridge. And so that's all going to make it a little bit more difficult for us, which I love. I mean, there's no better time than in this series to show you guys that although it may be initially intimidating, that poetry and creating songs and all of that is actually a little bit more intuitive and a little bit easier than the majority of people may suspect or anticipate. So that's enough introduction. Let's get into it. So first, I'm going to write down the specific structure that I'm going to be following. If you're listening to this on the podcast, essentially what it comes down to is a structure which I'm going to denote by A, C, A, C, B, A, C. So it's a very simple structure. Wherever you hear the word or the letter A, that's going to be our verse. And so A is verse, C, of course, is then the chorus, and then B is going to be our bridge. So once again, A, C, B, A, C. And so we have here a real repetition of, or this kind of oscillation between the verse and the chorus, which is typical, and then you have this little truncated bridge in the middle of it to add a little bit more zest. And if you're familiar with the types of sonnets, in my head at least, this is a little bit similar to the Petrarchian sonnet, where you have one shift where the poem starts taking a new direction. And that's exactly what I see the bridge as being, is that shift where you're at a low point. This is a new little aspect of the song that we are unfamiliar with as the listener. And so it's kind of hinting at a new direction for the song, at a new perspective, a new development, something along those lines. And so that keeps the song really fresh and entertaining and all of that jazz. So now that we have the basic structure, what I want to really underscore here is songwriting especially focuses on imagery. Now, I know you guys are all familiar with the concept of show, don't tell. And I think it's been used as a platitude for so long that a lot of people don't really understand what it means. But essentially, I'll give you an example. So instead of saying, I'm homesick, right? Which, okay, like that's cool and all, but what is that actually saying? That's not making me feel anything. That's just stating a fact, like it's a diagnosis or something. Instead of saying something like that, of course, you can say something like, I've come down with homegrown fever. Something along those lines. And so you can see that that's a new way of portraying that, and it really ties in with that concept of sickness, which when you say homesick, it's not really made analogous to an ordinary type of sickness, but in this case, you're really emphasizing that it's having a physical and emotional and cognitive impact on you from being away for so long. And so, of course, I'm sure a lot of you guys are already super familiar with this idea. I mean, as a poet, your whole entire wheelhouse is showing, not telling. I mean, that's exactly what it means to be a poet. But yeah, especially in story or in terms of songwriting, you really want to focus on imagery because that's what people will cling on to. You're not really writing a thesis or anything. They really just want to share in this collective human experience. And that's pretty much the essence of songwriting. Now, in terms of meter, this is probably the most nebulous part of writing a song. Is a lot of the times the meter is built around the actual chords and the strumming pattern rather than the other way around. But quite simply, I'm going to set a rather basic meter for myself just as a grafting post so that when I actually get into writing it, I'll be like, okay, I have 12 beats plus or minus 1 or 2. And so that has some sort of consistency, but at the same time, make sure not to pigeonhole yourself here. This is kind of unlike actual poetry writing, because in actual poetry writing, a lot of the times, especially with like, say, a sonnet, you're going to follow that same meter, right? You're going to have the iambic pentameter or something along those lines, where it's going to be consistent. Of course, you can syncopate other meters into this story, but largely it's going to be the same unless you're doing something like free verse or something along those lines. But yeah, especially in songwriting, you have a lot of liberty in being malleable with your meter. You can add an extra syllable if you kind of pronounce the word differently, if you have a little bit of a slang or a lazy pronunciation where you kind of merge two words together. That happens all the time, and sometimes that sounds better than having the words separated. And of course, this just adds another tool into your toolbox when trying to convey meaning, right? If you're trying to emphasize that you are merging with this new aspect of your life, if you merge the words quite literally, you're going to convey that aspect of synergy or a mixing of these two different aspects. And so yeah, let me just write that down really quickly here. So I'm going to follow a 12, 12, 10, 12 meter for the verse. So this is for verse. So 12 beats, 12 beats, 10 beats, 12 beats. Or rather than beats, let's just go ahead and talk in terms of poetry. So syllables. So 12 syllables, 12 syllables, 10 syllables, 12 syllables. And so that 10 syllable, that's going to be kind of the awkward child, as I would like to say. It really doesn't fit with the other ones, but this is just setting up for the 12th, the final 12th syllable. And usually it's a little bit more terse because, once again, it is setting up for that final line that really just ties everything together in that verse. And then for the chorus, we're just going to keep it the same. So it's going to be 5 syllables, 5 syllables, 5 syllables, 5 syllables for the chorus. And that's because just the chorus I want to make simple, because we're going to be repeating it, and it may seem a little bit awkward if we play with that a little bit too much. But yeah, essentially, this is what it's going to look like. Obviously, as I've been saying, we can add a little margin for error, plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2 syllables. That is completely fine. Even when writing, typical or traditional poetry, it's fine if you don't follow the meter. It needs to follow some sort of logic, though. It needs to have some sort of effect. Otherwise, it's just lazy, right? You don't want to sound like a mumble rapper or anything like that. But yeah, essentially, I think we have a pretty good gateway into actually writing the poem now, or the song. And one last thing, actually, that I want to include is, once again, another little visual representation of the intensity of the song. And so, essentially, we're going to start with the verse, and this has, a moderate slope, and this is going to be verse 1. And then it's going to have an inflection point at the chorus where it really starts to pick up in intensity. Of course, the y-axis is going to be intensity / emotion. And then the x-axis is going to be time. And then, so yeah, this is chorus 1. And then once again, we're going to have a little bit of a inflection point there where it kind of plateaus with verse 2. And then in the same way, we're going to have another positive inflection point for chorus 2, where it reaches its relative maximum in terms of intensity, and then it's going to plummet, and it's going to go down to the bridge. And the bridge is going to be kind of relaxed. It's going to be reflective, where I'm really realizing that being away from home isn't as great as I may have thought it was. And also during this time, I may begin to realize that home is not just a place, but you can also have multiple homes and multiple families. And so I begin to realize that this new group can be my home away from home. And so that's the bridge. And then, of course, the verse brings it back up a little bit. And then finally, leveling off with the final chorus, where it reaches a new maximum, and then it'll kind of exponentially decay as I just trill into the end of the song. And so with that in mind, we now have a graphical representation of the intensity of the song, so that when we're writing the lyrics, we can model this and really make sure that this intensity is coming through with the types of words that we use. And yeah, so I think we have a pretty good start here. I'm really looking forward to next episode, where we will really dive into writing the song. It's going to be difficult. I'm not going to deny it, because I've never tried something like this, where you try and merge both the strumming pattern and coming up with guitar chords, while also having these lyrics that really complement the natural flow and the natural progression of the song. it's going to be really difficult to match the different transitions from the chords with the different transitions from each verse. But hey, that's what this is all about. Poetry is a process. It is not something that you innately know, or it's not something that just pours out onto the page. It's a bunch of trial and error. And so, if you have any questions or want to reach out to me, feel free to take a look at our website, www.WhyItMeters.com. And you can either try out the Build-A-Bard screen, which is a lot of fun and can really get you on your way to creating your own poems, or you can, if you already have compositions, you can just upload them to the Publix Poetic Publications page, which is super easy, and I'll make sure to give you compliments and critiques if you want them, and overall we can just enjoy what it means to be a poet. So yeah, as always, let's get writing.